So the first presentation is going to be from Justin from Fusionworkshop, and Justin is going to talk to us about a content-first approach to building Sitecore websites.
Hi, thanks for having me on. There's probably more people here tonight than I've ever seen in the whole time I've been to Sitecore user groups. From Cardiff area to go to Bristol, so it's quite encouraging. Here tonight to talk about content first. It says approach on there, but I don't want to evangelise about this. I just basically wanted to put something out there to let you know how we're coping with something we find quite hard, or be particularly hard. Because there's not an awful lot of information about this anywhere, certainly any documentation that we found when you first start off trying to create a data structure within Sitecore. Content first is just a little bit of an approach that we've got that has kind of come through experience. And it's more about getting the customer involved very early on. It's an inclusive process, and that inclusive part is actually the site owner, be it content editor, content strategist, whoever you've got available to you who understands the content they're trying to produce. And we're basically trying to look for a way of creating a data structure and the editor within a Sitecore project. So why do we do this? Well, everybody understands the importance of content, at least you hope so within a website, certainly within a CMS-driven website. So it's understandable for everybody to get hold of this and really run with it. Mistakes early on are easy to rectify because you're just changing content, which you're probably going to do throughout the process anyway. It cuts down on change or scope creep, depending on your approach. And it illustrates and uses objects, Sitecore's object-based structure very well. And it also gives you the ability to manage content strategy very, very early on in a project. There's some aims. You can probably think of these as principles rather than aims, if you like. Define the content structure, using the correct field types, ensure user ambitions and goals can be tracked. Think about CMS, DMS, not just CMS, and avoid tie-in content presentation. Excuse me, avoid. What's important about content? Why should it come first? Well, two perspectives really. From a business perspective, data and information are probably the most important things online to them, or even offline as well. Thinking of content and data as an asset, it's very important to a business. And secondly, in Sitecore, we need that data and information structure. We need our object templates within the system to be able, in order to be pretty much be able to do anything. What is content? Well, these are a couple or three that I pulled off of dictionaryreference.com. They all kind of lead into each other. They're all slightly different. The first one is talking about the contents of something, with perhaps the emphasis on the something, be it a website or a box. The second one is more about expression, conversation, what that content's trying to do. And then the third one is about substantive information or creative material viewed in contrast to its actual presentation. So we've got the box, we've got what we're trying to say. This one's actually saying what's in that box is actually the important bit. I think that's quite important to remember. Content's derived. Whenever we see content or a page on a website or part of a page, some content that's come from somewhere else being syndicated through, it's probably made up of a number of data items, commonly including text, images, metadata, and it could come from a number of sources. I'm sure within many projects you're aggregating data in from external systems. I was at a workshop a couple of months ago that was based around content editors, content strategists. It's actually really interesting to see kind of like the other side. And at the start, we started off by putting some concerns, sorry if this is jumping in and out, about what people felt was the most important thing to them around what they do. And some of the things that came out were quite interesting. This was at the start. Not using lorem ipsum within the project anywhere was obviously quite important to a content strategist, whereas it's always a fallback. You know, can you think of any projects where you haven't used it at any point? Other areas where, you know, how does content strategy fit into other disciplines? How do we work in an agile manner? And no one in the room, out of about 50 people, actually worked with content strategy in an agile project, which I found really, really surprising. At the end of the day, we've got all those concerns, put them back on the board, and everybody's given a number of little yellow stickers to put on the board for things that they felt were most important to them. And the ones that came out were generally around about their job role as a content strategist, content editor, copywriter, not necessarily the things that we would probably find important, like being channel agnostic, multi-channel, mobile, long page, data integrity, all those kind of things. They were more about how can we work within projects and get accepted in projects, how can we make content more important. So on to our first points then, defining content structure, entity, attributes, relationship framework. As developers, I think understanding data structure is at the basis of what everybody does in that line of work, in that job. Be it object-oriented, I'm not a developer by the way, as you can probably tell. Be it object-oriented systems, database schemas, whatever that might be, it's at the crux of what you do. And in order to understand what we're actually trying to put into Sitecore, we need to have a certain number of artifacts that we're given by a customer. The two, probably the most important ones that we need are representative content, because it gives us an idea of what we're trying to put in, and then content order or inventory, which provides the governance for how we should use that content. This is a list of principles to creation and understanding of information architecture from a guy called Dan Brown at 8 Shapes. I think if you search for any of this online, you get a lot more information about it. But you can see right there at the bottom is objects. And that's what we're doing, is we're taking content or data and putting it into objects so it can be utilised by us within the system, within Sitecore. And we've got to think about everything we do in an entity. An entity can have attributes, and that entity also has relationships with other entities within the system. This is Elements of User Experience diagram. This is from about the year 2000 by Jesse James Garrett. And you can see at the bottom is initial requirements, initial engagement with the customer, and at the top is the endpoint delivery. And you see the content's right down the bottom. You've got your content requirements. This originally was web software on one side, and on the other side was a hypertext system, so website versus a thin client. I'd say that's pretty much merged today. So we've got some requirements with user stories, or you're still in sort of discovery mode, and you've got some ideas of what you're trying to achieve. You get some representative content back, of which we've got a quotes object. We break it down into the content definition and what field types we might use for that. We then put it into Sitecore, and at this point is when we really need to start prototyping. This is when we can start playing with the system, get it out onto the screen, and hand it over to that content strategist or whoever's in charge of the content of the customer. And at this point then we can really start the development once that content's in the system. How does it interact with other elements around it? How do these widgets, UI patterns, whatever you want to call them, sit in the page, in the layout? What placeholders are they in? What's the insert options, etc.? Visual design comes in, it's going to change again, it's always going to change, it's an agile process. And eventually we end up with an object, not necessarily using all the fields and all the attributes and relationship, but certainly part of that, and it ends up on the end website. It's a quick, nice, easy way for doing your object definition. The outer box is a long page. Each one of the yellow stickies is a widget or a piece of functionality within that, and then that's then broken down into definitions. That could be taken a level further, for now product descriptions, etc., broken down into discrete fields. Second point, don't worry, there's not as many slides in each point. Using the correct field types. You've got to remember that when we're putting our data and creating our templates within Sitecore, we're actually creating the UI for the editor. This is from a blog, John West's blog. Basically, it was best practice. I think it was 10 points of best practice, and this one was about IA. So when defining requirements, focus on information architecture, which includes data templates, standard value definitions, including workflow, layout details, insert options, content tree, and relations with other items. Now, the second half of that, I think we all understand, and it's what we do every day when we're doing object definition and template creation in Sitecore. And it's about standard values, workflow, layout details, relationship. But I think the thing here that's quite pertinent is the fact we're defining requirements when we're doing this. We haven't built anything yet. We're still at that initial defining requirements phase. I think it's really important that this is when this is done. Ensure ambitions and business goals can be met and tracked. Every piece of content should meet business objectives and provide ROI. If it doesn't, then just take it off the website. It shouldn't be there, really. It should support relationships, infrastructure, drive innovation. It should have focus and purpose. And it needs to have a life cycle. There's always governance involved in this. So how do we give content focus? This is pretty much where this content first thing comes in and talking with the customer a lot. We often find that you ask what's the business goal, what's this page for, what's this screen for, and they quite often can't tell you. But as soon as you then ask the right questions in the right language, it certainly becomes really obvious. And without knowing what the business goal is, then how can you really start to use DMS further down the line? You don't know what the engagement value of that is without understanding what the business goal is, really. Objective, just give you some examples. It could be to increase revenue, decrease costs, etc. What's the objective? Well, here's some examples. Attract new customers, establish credibility. These may not be the right ones that work for your project or for that website, for that customer, but just understanding that one or two of these defined against each piece of content can really, really help. Communication goal. Again, what we're trying to do. Again, this without knowing this, you can't really move on and use DMS. So basically, having KPIs up front means that we can measure that effectiveness. No piece of content that goes out the door is going to stay that way, and the purpose of each page or screen of the website is going to change over any short period of time. Certainly once you've gone live within 6 to 12 months, that site can be very, very different, especially if it's a re-platform or a new site in Sitecore. The customer's going to learn very, very quickly. Certainly that's what we found, and unless we approach this up front, we've come up against problems at a later date. Designing for Sitecore engagement platform, not just CMS. I haven't got an awful lot to say about it. It's such a big area that I couldn't possibly stand in front of you and you can pretend to be an expert in this. But a few things. Based on what we've just talked about, understanding the purpose of a piece of content or what the focus of that content is. Certainly if you've got a focus of the content, it's a lot easier, to be able to profile all that in DMS. If you don't know what the focus is, what the idea is or what you're trying to say, then it's going to be very hard to try and profile it in the DMS. Obviously object structure. And I think I was speaking to Meta last week from S-Boss, and she was saying that bottom line is if the page editor works, then DMS should work, or you should at least be able to get it to work. Certainly in the past we haven't always implemented page editor completely in every project we've done, but now we're finding that with a lot more follow-up and people starting to take DMS that it just has to be done. And I don't think necessarily the technical mastery of DMS is the hard piece. The really hard bit is understanding and knowing what the customer wants the DMS to do. That's the greatest challenge we're finding at the moment. I don't know if it's the same for you, but even the customer understanding what they want, and then we usually find that they come to us and say, well, what can it do? We really, really want to use DMS. This sounds amazing. Just make it do stuff for us. We know it's amazing. We want it to do amazing things. And without understanding this whole process and having to go back through this, you haven't really got a start point, certainly from our experience. And then finally, 5, I think this is just fairly common knowledge. I'm not going to really hang around on this too much, but content typed presentation means that you're going to struggle with it moving forward. We've got 4 Bs that we kind of follow, which might be useful or might not. Obviously everything's going to be a compromise, you're not going to stick rigidly to these, but content independent technology is always a good thing. Use labels rather than having content in code. Separate from behaviour or separate from interaction. It's sometimes it's quite a hard one to achieve, but like a carousel slide where you've got specific content doing a specific thing because of JavaScript in there. Try and reuse shared items rather than writing specifically into the slide if possible. It's not always possible to do this, but it's worth considering. Be channel agnostic. I think that's one of the big sort of key things from the last year or so. And separate formatting from aesthetics, which kind of the last point leads on to the next slide. I don't want to teach suck eggs, but you see this so often with projects, certainly with in-house teams, because we've all made mistakes in agency and kind of rectifying that and learning from that. Like I said earlier at the start, there isn't any real sort of handbook for setting up data structure within Sitecore. So these mistakes happen quite commonly. Large rich text editor is the page. I don't think that ever happens anymore, but I thought it'd be worth bringing up as a point. H1, some intro text, main image, main copy, all stuffed into a rich text area. People still ask for it. It's obviously not something that happens very often. And then a footer on every page, I think that was going a bit too far, but structure-based page templates or page layouts being referenced, or the content being stored based on the page structure. Again, rich text fields, each of those should be maybe centre column being your actual page definition in there, broken down into a more defined structure. Left and right column, you're bringing in related items there. And latest news, surely you should just be putting in news based on classification and by date, latest first, or something along those lines. But we still see this one, unfortunately, quite a lot. So we've got a slightly better structure here. Now we've got a title, main text, a link, but we've still got our related content in the page. Surely this should be an item that we're relating to and pulling in and referencing from the page. Going one stage further again, we've now got related content and we're storing our content items externally, be it in a shared data node or something along those lines. But we reference them in a drop link, maybe, I guess. But you're sort of encapsulating that content into the page, whereas perhaps a better way of doing that would be, you could use maybe a parameter to pull in that content item and put it in the presentation layer, or have some sort of categorization using perhaps DMS, or even categorization you put up front into config to pull in related items, however that configuration may work. So putting it all together, there are 5 points just to recap on them. Information architecture in context of Sitecore is a process that leads to object and template definition. We need to ensure the user ambitions and business goals can be met. We need to use Sitecore field types based on content requirements, and always remember you're building that editor's UI. And Sitecore is a customer engagement platform, so unless your content's structured correctly, the DMS just isn't going to work. And content tied to layout can't necessarily always be repurposed. Some resources. Professional Sitecore Development book by John West. Chapter 2 is all about IA, it's quite useful. Data definition reference and data definition cookbook, all on SDN, and reusing and sharing data on SDN as well is quite useful. Like I said at the start, I have this kind of, when I first started using Sitecore about 2 years ago, I really struggled to get my head around this coming from page-based systems, and there's not a lot of information out there, which is why I've chosen to talk about this tonight. It would be nice if we did have somewhere to get a little bit more information from this. It's probably something that perhaps people aren't willing to share, or I don't know. Or perhaps it's just something that just happens and I haven't quite got a grasp of it yet. But I think it is an area that we could do better maybe across the board. And certainly something that, if we kind of work a little bit more, there's some area where we could kind of share ideas a little bit easier, because we would do for code and other things I've seen at user groups. People are quite happy to share little code snippets but not necessarily talking about information architecture and data structure. So in summary, just to kind of sum it all up, the way that data is stored, its structure, relationships and governance should support and allow content to be purposeful, no matter how or where it's surfaced, who's viewing it and why. I think that kind of covers everything we just talked about there. Thanks for your time, and hopefully that was useful. I'm hoping that I'll get something useful back from you guys later on this evening. Thanks for your time.